Hey guys, this is AnandTech from AnandTech.com. We are live here from Computex 2014. Intel just finished up a press conference here and they lent us the stage. I'm joined by Dr. Ian Cutress.
Hello.
And we want to talk about all things mobile and all things happening mobile at Computex. So I just got here a few hours ago. Ian, you've been here since how long ago?
It's Sunday night. It's been a whirlwind of everything. Computex, everything happens.
But prior to Computex, you were at LG's G3 event.
In London, in Battersea Park.
How'd that go?
The device itself.
So take us through the device. LG G3. It's Snapdragon 801 inside.
1440p screen.
Okay, and that's the big feature of this thing, right?
Yeah, like so it's 560 ppi, which you need for all the Oriental characters being able to see properly.
Interesting. So was that the driving factor behind that?
Their main factor was that you wanted they wanted art book quality. You know, so you have classical magazine glossy quality, and then art book is a bit more detailed.
Okay.
They wanted that on the screen.
Cool. And you know, one of the things that LG's kind of really been pushing is very thin bezels, relocating all the buttons onto the back of the device. I haven't even seen it, right? You played around with it. What were your thoughts?
I've not touched a G2 with a slider on the back, so I initially found it very odd with a button on the back. Cause
the buttons on the back, that's definitely weird, especially if you're transitioning between devices quite frequently, but I found it something that I could definitely get used to.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense if you're taking it out of your pocket and you need to answer quickly.
Yeah. Now your daily driver is a 1 Max.
1 Max.
And how did it compare to that? The 1 Max is pretty big.
So with the 1 Max, I eventually got used to it after 3-4 months of daily use. So any phone smaller than that now feels slightly odd to me.
Really?
Yeah, but so with the 1 Max, that's a 1080p screen on a 6-inch.
Yes.
This is a 4040p on a 5-inch. You can't tell the difference necessarily, just at a quick glance. But the resolutions are different. You can tell that the phone needs the extra horsepower to drive the display. So just flicking through.
Oh, interesting.
There was a little slight delay. If you focus, you could notice it.
Yeah.
But daily use, you probably wouldn't.
So that's actually interesting because while you were doing that, I was in San Francisco for a separate Qualcomm event where we were doing Snapdragon 805 performance testing.
Yeah.
And 805 adds Crate 450 versus Crate 400, so no real IPC changes on the CPU core side, but definitely a frequency bump. Right, so we go from 2.5 to 2.7 gigahertz, but the big change is on the GPU, right? So they go from Adreno 330 to brand new Adreno 420, so brand new GPU architecture. And if you look at our preview, the one I guess overarching factor, the one thing that separates 805 from 801 is its ability to drive 1440p displays. So if you have a Snapdragon 801 driving a 1080p, you roughly get the same GPU performance. At least in existing benchmarks of Snapdragon 805 driving a 1440p display. And that's the thing that I guess we all wished was in the G3, but I think you got some data saying that just the cost differential of that alone was something insane, wasn't it?
Yeah, perhaps another 25%, I think I was told.
So another 25% on the SoC cost. That's why we don't see it in the G3. That's why it's still an 801.
Yeah.
But there is that mismatch between SoC and display resolution.
Yeah. So it does mean in the future, as it ramps up, eventually we get to a point where the display hits a point where nobody needs it to go any higher.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that's in the 3K or the 4K range, or?
I don't know. I mean, you could have said that the original Retina display was okay.
Yeah.
Right. I think at this point. I don't know, having never used a 1440p display, so you said you didn't notice a difference between that.
You don't casually notice a difference.
Yeah, but you could say that for a lot of kind of resolution scaling on a lot of these devices.
I guess where you notice it more is when you have the low resolution images and they're stretched.
Yeah.
So you see the pixelation. The LG had a few images that were pixelated, which. But you go to the normal menus and options, and they were perfectly fine.
In-hand feel of the device?
Yeah, so they're using sort of the curved rear, similar to the HTC 1 Max.
But it's not a stack battery, right? It's not a pyramid stack.
No.
It's just the curvature is the same.
It's just a curvature, yeah. So that in-hand feel, compared to, say, the iPhone 5, which is more just a block device, I much prefer that curved rear.
Would you go back to it as a Like, are you sold on 6-inch devices now, or would you go back to something that small?
I probably, if I had a 5-inch device and I had to use it, I probably wouldn't worry about the fact that it was a 5-inch.
Yeah.
The 6-inch just helps remove some elements out of my life where I'd need, say, a laptop when I'm on the road.
Interesting. So you're a convert now. You're like a phablet convert.
I could see, yeah.
Really? Like, so, I mean, and obviously, like, that's the market, you know, a lot of folks, I mean, even Apple was rumored to, like, be working on nearly 6-inch devices.
So before the HTC One Max, I was using a Galaxy S2, which was showing its age quite...
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so it's the 6-inch display means that if you're in a suit and you're working and it fits in, pockets have issues.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a short guys like us.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I can definitely see 6-inch being used in that premium.
Now, so it's interesting. You say that reduces the need for you to use a laptop, but you're not multitasking on this device, right? You're not multitasking on the screen. Like, what is it? Is it screen size? Is it the amount of information on the screen?
Yes, it's if you have a high resolution display in a small device in a 5 or a 4-inch, then you're constantly looking at it. So spreadsheets, perfect example. You're scrolling through.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah.
So do you use it for, like viewing benchmark data and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So viewing the web is a lot easier.
Okay. Now, ideally, right, if you split up the smartphone categories into, let's say, 4-inch class, upper 4-inch to 5-inch class, and 6-inch class, and let's say all of them are iterating at the same rate with regards to hardware, do you gravitate towards the 6-inch now? Is that's the roadmap you're going to follow?
Because it's what I've been using recently, then yes. It's a case of I'm flexible in the sense that if you put a device in front of me, I'll use it.
Just use whatever.
Yeah.
But what's your preference, right? I guess that's because that's the big challenge now, right? So, iPhone hits and 3.5 inches. That's the ideal form factor, and we noticed this with the launch of the first iPhone 5 as well as the iPhone 5S, that there was this kind of pent up demand for something bigger.
Yeah.
And even me personally, like my own tastes have changed, right? I was squarely in the 4-inch category in that camp, but I'd say over the past year and a half, I think 4.7 to 5 inches became my
I think
point.
if I went back to a 4-inch now, I'd get frustrated.
Yeah.
A little bit more than I do.
But what's your target? What's your ideal?
Probably sort of in the high 5s.
Okay.
It's with the 6-inch, you still have to use two hands.
Yes.
For a lot of activities. Mm-hmm. With the G3, it was a lot more one-handed in that form factor.
Yeah.
So.
But is the G3 still too small for you?
No, I think I could use it.
Okay.
Definitely.
So it's now. What did you think of? Like, again, they did really thin bezels on it. How did that? Do you care about that? I mean, that's something that a lot of people talk about.
So for me, bezels, it comes down to if you notice them.
Yes.
So they can be thin but not ultra thin, and you won't notice them.
Okay.
As long as you have easy access to the buttons, especially on the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
For me, I like a fixed button layout.
Okay.
So
interesting feature, nice to be there, but it's not a thing that's going to sell it for you.
No, I think because of the enthusiast how I am, I think I would notice the slowdown on the high resolution panel.
Okay,
based
before
on responsiveness. Yeah.
Okay. Other big feature. Tons of work done on the rear camera, right? They've got the IR laser rangefinder.
Yeah.
Now. So did they take you through how that works? I know Josh did a good piece on it.
It was so idea is I think they quoted sub 300 microseconds autofocus.
Milliseconds. Yeah. So that's the big number there, right? Like so. HTC came out with the M8 and Samsung came out with the Galaxy S5 and both of them kind of targeted around that 300 millisecond
I think it was 286 something similar on the G3.
The G3 was just slightly lower. And from what Josh learned when he went to the simultaneous event in San Francisco, you've got this like little IR window there on the side of the your rear facing sensor. It shoots out just like a point IR laser. It's a safe laser, right?
It's a beam.
Okay.
It's a beam. They weren't able to give us sort of angles on the beam.
Josh at least his conclusion was that it's a very, very narrow focus point, right? That it's like similar to almost a laser pointer in terms of target. And if I'm understanding correctly, the benefit is it's great for focus or determining a focal target within
with low light.
Both with low light, but also in very close distance. And if you're, the beam hits you, reflects off of you. If you're trying to focus on something further out, it can
takes
also
longer to do.
Well, it can also aid the contrast-based AF, right?
Sure.
So it can basically subtract out that initial.
Well, the G3 is meant to use contrast data as well as the laser.
Yeah, so it's a hybrid system, right?
Yeah.
So what the laser system does is let you not have to contrast scan those initial handful of feet, which improves time to focus.
Yeah.
Did you get to play with the camera at all?
Not so much. I think I had the device for a couple of days, and then I had to send it to Josh.
No, obviously, and Josh is running battery life work on it right now.
Yeah.
But this is a pre-production Korea model. The US ones won't be in our hands for a few weeks, and I think the UK ones will be shipping sometime soon. So I think even our initial data is going to be kind of rough around the edges.
Yeah. The samples we got, I think they were tuned for the Korean market. Mm-hmm. So
no difference in battery capacity.
No.
We might see some changes in battery life. Snapdragon 801 had that 28 HPM process push, right?
Yeah.
So slightly different process tech compared to 800. Maybe that gets us a little more battery life, but it's tough to sell at this point.
Always a good thing.
Yeah. Anything else from your time with the G3 that you can think of?
Variety of different colors.
Yeah. How did they look in person?
The gold one, which is the one they let me play with.
Yeah.
That was a little more stylish than I would have assumed, but
really?
Especially seeing the Samsung devices back at the Samsung launch.
How did it compare to Galaxy S5 in terms of industrial design? Do you have a preference one or another?
So it's essentially a polycarbonate with a metallic finish on the G3. So they're using a scratch-resistant film that gives it a metallic color. You'll probably see a number of people look at it and say that's metal.
Yeah, from the photos it looks like it's metal. In person, I'm assuming it just feels like a normal polycarbonate device.
Sure.
Is it any less? I mean, compared to the old hyperglaze stuff, is it any less fingerprint smudge, grease resistant?
I didn't notice any smudging myself.
Okay.
Based on my handheld usage. So.
Now you were both. You got exposure to Galaxy S5 as well. Industrial design wise, do you have a preference between the two?
I can't say, to be honest.
Is that something that typically matters to you? Industrial design, material feel. I mean, you strike me. You come from the more analytical side of things.
Yeah.
You strike me as the type of person that as long as the hardware is good, you're fine.
Yeah. No, I'd definitely say I was on that side of the fence. Yeah.
Interesting. As you play in mobile, do you find that changes your opinion at all? That you gravitate towards certain materials or certain builds more than others?
As long as it feels right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have issues. So, say sliding out your hand or something.
Does the G3 feel right?
Yeah. It's you've got your curved hand wrapped around the phone, whereas again with the iPhone 5, it is
a more squared off, blocky kind of design.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't know that. Have you looked at the leak renders of the purported iPhone 6? Is that?
No, I haven't. Sorry.
Okay, so that's more rounded on the edges, but it's not. It doesn't have that kind of depth curve to it.
Yeah. I guess thinking about it a bit more, that the lack of the curved design would steer me away from the iPhone.
Interesting.
Or at least the proposed.
Yeah. So that wraps up G3. Like I said, we will have more performance, battery life tests, display analysis. All of that stuff is coming. Josh is working on it right now. Let's get to some of the stuff that's going on here. So Intel launched a whole bunch of entry-level Bay Trail tablets.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. So Bay Trail, was announced not that long ago. But it showed up kind of as a let's call it performance mid-range and high-end SKU. What we've seen kind of teased before Computex and what we've seen at Computex is a real focus on reducing BOM cost and really getting it into low price points. Asus announced their MIUI Pad 7 with a Bay Trail inside at $150, right? So this is we're talking about CPU cores that were class leading when they were when they launched. Now in $150 devices. And if we look at how Intel structures its own competitive analysis and its own comparisons between Bay Trail entry, it's, you'll see some Qualcomm comparisons in there, but the default comparison is versus like an 8-core MediaTek, which is just insane to me, right? Like that we are seeing, Silvermont, Intel's flagship Atom core, go up against, these Cortex A7s. And it's a bloodbath, right? Like the obviously Silvermont is a far higher performing solution, but we're talking about those same $150 price points.
Sure. Do you see A7 reducing from scope as a result, or because it's so cheap?
No, I mean, I think obviously what you have is kind of a difference in roadmap alignment, right? Because like the real target would be Cortex A53, but we don't get that until later this year, and that's supposed to have a fairly decent increase in overall CPU performance. But where it stands today, I don't know. That I think everyone keeps saying that like this sub $200 or definitely sub $300 tablet market becomes really, really interesting, and especially even the phone market as well becomes really interesting over the next few years here. And I think once we get into that realm of performance, where we're talking about what was high end just a few months ago, being delivered at price points and tablets of $150, I think that's a game changer, right? Like that's the Nexus at just above $200. That definitely reset expectations for what you can get from an overall device standpoint at that price point. But I think as we get these SoCs down to sub $200 price points, that's from a performance standpoint, that's huge.
Yeah.
Now you're a Nexus 7 2013 owner yourself?
Correct.
Do you use it a lot?
Ever since I migrated to the larger smartphone, no.
Interesting.
So I have a 7-inch tablet and a 6-inch smartphone.
Yeah.
And so I do a fair bit of mobile gaming.
Okay.
And
what do you play now?
What do I play? Anything designed by Kairosoft.
Okay.
They're basically simulation games.
Yeah.
But of course, all my save data is on my smartphone.
Yes.
Because if I'm traveling, that's the thing I pull out on the London Underground.
Yeah.
For example. So carrying an extra device, I don't think I've charged my Nexus 7 in a good few months now.
I gotcha. Well, okay, so back when you were a Nexus 7 owner, I mean, the idea of a higher performance $150 tablet, does that appeal to you? Is that...
So as the developers making games are using enhanced visual features, you do see the need for increased performance.
Yes.
From a gaming perspective. Single core performance for responsiveness, and just the horsepower for gaming. Yeah,
especially on these large screen devices, right? I remember that was the one thing, if you looked at the iPhone 5S launch event, right? They had Epic on there showing off the latest Infinity Blade, and it looked wonderful on like the massive 60-foot screen that they were projecting it on.
Yeah.
But you go down to a 4-inch device, and it's like I can't tell at all. But especially as you talk about these tablets, right?
Yeah.
Where you're talking about potentially really, really high fidelity gaming experiences,
especially at high resolutions.
Yeah, performance absolutely matters there.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping we'll see is not just a focus on improving CPU performance per dollar down at those devices, but also GPU performance as well. The other big announcement that happened right before Computex was this Intel Rockchip partnership. Did you follow that at all?
Not so much. They mentioned it in the keynote.
Yes.
Especially relating to Sophia in the low-end markets.
So for those of you that haven't followed, the idea was that Intel announced the strategic partnership or strategic engagement with Rockchip, and they've kind of positioned it in a few ways, right? So we have Sophia, which is Intel's low-cost, highly integrated, Atom-based SoC solution.
So correct me if I'm wrong, that's going after especially the Nokia market in Africa.
Yeah,
South America.
It's going after any market that really is interested in, that's cost-sensitive and also wants integrated
connectivity. So sort of those $50 to $70 handsets.
Or even more, right? Like it's the price point really is dependent on the actual final price,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
But traditionally that the roadmap for that was by the end of the year we get a Silvermont-based Atom SoC with integrated Intel 3G modem by the end of this year. And then sometime kind of middle to latter half of next year we get a quad-core Atom-based SoC with Intel integrated LTE.
That would be a Cherry Trail.
Well, I mean, no. So it's a Sophia part, right? It's a Sophia LT.
Okay.
But what was missing was the kind of, the China SKU, right? What do because in China you can't sell a dual core part anymore, apparently, right? So you need a quad core version with 3G to kind of hit
64-bit.
Yeah, to hit the lower price points.
Yeah.
That didn't exist. Rather than kind of tasking or creating another team within Intel internally to kind of go off and plan and design this chip, they do a strategic engagement with Rockchip, and what you get is a Rockchip-led design team leveraging Intel IP to kind of put together this SoC to fill a hole in the roadmap.
So developing derivatives of the Intel architecture that they've designed in-house.
Yeah, so this is obviously the first of what I'm assuming is a very long strategic engagement.
Right.
So I wouldn't use this as an example of how everything's going to work going forward. But the idea here, as far as I can tell, is Intel shows up with the CPU IP and maybe its own know-how and little bits and pieces. But the Rockchip SoC team comes in, integrates it, brings maybe third-party graphics IP, and ultimately they are the ones that end up designing the SoC. The SoC is fabbed at TSMC, just like the rest of the Sophia line. And it's dual sold, right? So Rockchip will sell this to its traditional customer base, all the mainland China tech ecosystem folks, and Intel will sell this, maybe under they're all Intel branded, but under to its own customers.
What do you think happens to Rockchip's ARM business as a result of the partnership?
So Intel came out and they said, "Hey, look, this doesn't affect that. There's no investment here. This is nothing more than a strategic engagement." And from Rockchip's perspective, the Chinese SoC space, where everyone's leveraging vanilla ARM IP, that's a very, very crowded market. So we've seen a few folks like Ramos with their tablets using Intel as a way to differentiate in a very crowded market.
Sure.
In this case, Rockchip becomes the sole provider of x86, IA x86 SoCs outside of Intel. So it is a point of differentiation.
Would you happen to know what Rockchip's market percentage is in China?
I don't know, actually. I know, I guess they said they shipped 40 million SoCs, tablet SoCs last year.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not an insignificant market, but obviously it's
primarily to the Asian market.
Yeah. But we are seeing it, outside of there as well, right? Like there's Rockchip-based devices globally. But I think the idea is that Intel will leverage its existing customers to target a lot of those markets.
Yeah.
But it's huge. Like this is a very unique world for Intel to be playing in. And it's in a lot of ways it's a sign that this is a more flexible Intel than we've seen in the past.
So they either had a chance of doing it, going their own way, and slowly building up, or this partnership, which essentially makes them jump a few steps ahead.
Yeah.
In exchange for the partnership.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Like it adds breadth and time to market that we necessarily hadn't seen in the past, and it expresses a willingness to kind of try things that we maybe wouldn't have seen previously.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something interesting to watch, something interesting to kind of keep an eye on. I'm more interested in seeing not necessarily how this one turns out, but what happens with the one after this, the one after that.
Sure.
Right? Does the engagement, does it get deeper? Do we start seeing more development work done over there, and Intel ends up being kind of more of the hey, look, we'll help you build whatever it is that you need to build, right? Because the strength there is not just in the fabs, but in the architects and the ability to produce really high quality IP.
So how long do you think the first product to market will come?
So what's crazy about this is they said they started the engagement a couple quarters ago,
right?
And this quad core Rockchip based Rockchip SoC with integrated 3G modem. They're talking about shipping that in the first half of next year. So it's incredibly quick, right? And I think that's part of why this whole thing is happening.
12 to 18 months from
just even talking about it, right? Like that's kind of crazy. So we'll see what happens. The reason, so shifting gears a bit, the reason that I just got here a few hours ago is I was at Apple's WWDC, which historically, at least in recent history, has not overlapped with Computex, but this year a bunch of things changed. So one, they decided to overlap with Computex. so that meant that I wasn't here for the beginning of the show. And then two, this is the first year that we're being allowed kind of more access. So the developer NDAs are still in place. We can't post screenshots and any of that stuff.
That's a shame.
But we're given a little more background on kind of what's going on over there. So did you catch any of the announcements?
Unfortunately not. It was just that busy here.
Yeah, I mean, you were obviously in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So at a high level, this was a very, very developer-focused conference. So no hardware announcements. And it makes sense, WWDC it's a developer conference, right? So it's kind of conveniently been used as a hardware show, but for the most part, it's there to serve the developers and to talk software. So obviously the two big announcements, there's the next version of OS 10, Yosemite, and then on the mobile side, iOS 8. From my perspective, this is very, I don't know, it's funny how like this 2-year cadence became the right way to do everything, right? So Intel found it with TikTok, and even Apple, we've seen this, right, where you have a big architecture talk, right, when it comes to a software introduction, and then you have the kind of polish above and beyond that, and that's really what iOS 8 is, right? So visually, it builds upon iOS 7, but there's a whole bunch of stuff going on underneath the hood, a whole bunch of other tweaks. Definitely an evolutionary improvement over it. Some of the big things that they talked about at the show, new programming language with Swift, really a compaction, a streamlined version of Objective-C. Josh is working on doing kind of a deeper piece going into exactly what it is, but really promoting more efficient code writing, and also like a huge scriptability angle here, right? So Apple compared it to Python and your ability to just write a Swift script and have it run, in a window, right? As you're kind of treating it like a scripting language. There's also a huge focus on kind of reducing errors, right? So like the go-to-fail sort of errors, and just not allowing that stuff to exist. Then the other big news, and this was huge. So Tim Sweeney, founder of Epic Games, this is I think the first Apple event that I've seen him at. He came out to kind of demo Metal, which is their new, ultra low level 3D API, and this is a huge deal, right? So they made the same sort of claims that AMD did with Mantle, where you get this kind of tremendous increase in the amount of draw calls you can do. And Ryan Smith did a great story on this just yesterday, actually, where he explained, look, why do you need something like this in mobile? And one of the great numbers that EA threw out when they were talking about porting Frostbite to iOS was that they couldn't even support 4,000 draw calls, right? Like that's how low power the platform was. Especially you're dealing with these ultra low power CPUs that don't have gobs of extra performance to offer. So having a very, very lightweight, low-level API makes a ton of sense.
So one thing I did see come out of that is developers who co-develop both on iPhone and iOS and Android. Having such a low-level API essentially means you need 2 complete design teams.
It definitely makes portability more interesting. And I think, obviously you can make an argument for why Metal is useful. And I think it's a great thing, right? I think the huge missed opportunity with Apple and actually with pretty much everyone in mobile today is no one's really treating it like a true console platform. And the biggest missed opportunity for me is Microsoft, right? Because they have this huge games publishing business that I would love to see leveraged. But
bring Xbox Live to a Windows phone.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, and I think a lot of these folks, Apple, in particular, they're a great example of this. Have done a great job capitalizing on casual gaming. But I still feel like there's this entire market for deeper gaming that's just not done, on Android, on iOS, and definitely on Windows Phone. But I look at something like Metal as a great way of bringing some of these higher performing, kind of really deep experiences to the platform. Now, there are other problems you have to solve. You have to solve the controller problem. You have to solve the display problem. If it's going to be a wireless display tethered to like a TV, you have to solve a latency issue, right? Like there are a bunch of challenges there. But I think this is a component in if you want to go off and fix some of this stuff, and you want to. Everyone talks about mobile being the thing that kills the current generation of fixed consoles. Well, if you actually want to do that, Metal is a key component of it. So I thought that was a really big deal. But as you bring up, like this does present a portability challenge.
Yeah.
I definitely think that maybe is not a primary motivator behind it, but I don't think Apple will complain, right?
So from my perspective, as an Android user, I'm invested in the Android ecosystem.
Yes.
It would take a large shift for me to go over to the iPhone
yes.
ecosystem and play games on that platform. Perhaps rebuying some of my apps, that's not something I particularly want to do.
But would you do it if the games were compelling enough, right? Like if there were a title that existed there.
It comes down to the console launches, which ones have more AAA titles.
Yeah.
And I don't think until the smartphones start having those AAA titles,
yeah.
you know, the ones that go amazing on the graphics, amazing on the gameplay, that don't cost $65
yeah.
on a smartphone.
Well, the business model is different, right? Now, so I got a bunch of questions here, right? So I think you highlight the exact reason that these mobile guys need to focus on true deep gaming. Because the problem you have here is eventually everyone's emails, Twitter, and web browsing and messaging get good enough. And then the question is, well, how do you differentiate between these platforms?
Yeah.
And an obvious way of differentiating between the platforms is exclusive titles. And gaming lends itself very, very well to that.
Well, so Microsoft and Sony, they invest in the AAA titles.
Correct.
So do you see Apple and Google investing in?
So you look at what Amazon did with the Fire TV, right? You know, they bring their own first-party games to market. Now, I don't think that, you know, what they've done is super deep and like, you know, the pinnacle and epitome of what you need to do as a mobile or a new world console maker, but they have the right idea. You need to have a first-party games business.
Well, this is where Microsoft would win out if they had the ecosystem in place.
Absolutely. Like, I think that's always been the trump card here, right? The question is, can Microsoft treat Xbox as a platform and allow the platform to kind of exist on Windows Phone, and all of this stuff.
Does having the Xbox OS on a hypervisor?
Yeah, I mean, it's already done,
yeah.
right? Like that part is done. But you run into other issues, right? There are organizational challenges within Microsoft as a whole, and then there's also performance challenges, right? Microsoft has not really pushed, you know, performance with regards to Windows Phone.
Yeah.
So there's that. The other question I'd ask is, you know, as we got on this topic of kind of mobile gaming and deeper, you know, gaming and mobile, you mentioned games that are AAA titles but that don't cost $65. What is the upper bound for mobile, like a deep mobile game price point for you?
That's a tricky one. It's okay. For example, the new Mario Kart was just launched.
Yes.
Imagine if you had 4 people with smartphones streaming to the TV.
Yeah.
4-player.
Sure. That
would be an example of a AAA title.
Okay. But how much would you pay for it? Right, because today that's the big challenge.
So essentially you get merging into other handheld consoles like the DS.
Sure.
So DS games, typically an average one would be about 20 to 30 US, and then...
Would you pay 20 to 30 US for a deep, you know, let's say 8 to 10 hours of gameplay smartphone game?
If I had the next Mario Kart, yeah.
Okay.
Sure, because that's going to eat up the time when I'm waiting for things to happen.
Yeah. So I think that's whether or not we see Apple or Google or Microsoft or who does this first, I think that's that needs to be an end game for these guys. Metal and other, you know, low-level 3D APIs, that's an obvious component of this, but like I said, you got to handle wireless display properly. You need a controller solution. You know, when I was at the Snapdragon 805, or actually at a Qualcomm event that preceded that, I remember touring their gaming lab, and you walk in and, you know, they've just got a conference table full of tablets, each with wireless controllers tethered to them. And honestly, it reminded me of, you know, just kind of the old PC LAN party days, right? Where you literally have these people, you know, lugging an entire tower, keyboard, mouse, and monitor, right, to a physical location so they can kind of network game with one another.
That was the good time.
Yeah, and you know, if any of these guys really focuses on enabling that experience in mobile and with tablets, I can totally see, you know, an entire ecosystem or entire group of people doing that exact same thing with a tablet and a controller.
Yeah.
Right? It's it's either me being like way too old school, or it makes a lot of sense, right? Like,
well, if you take a lot of the mobile games now, particularly sort of like the hacky, slashy, rogue type games, it's you play and it's sort of 2D isometric, and then in order to play multiplayer, you have to connect to a slow server, and then you've got all the in-app purchases.
Yes.
The thing with a AAA title is it has to cut out the in-app purchases.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I had this conversation with Ryan Smith recently where, we were talking about what's wrong when mobile, and particularly with mobile gaming. And his answer was, yeah, you got to get rid of, all the crap that comes with free-to-play, right?
Yeah.
And in-app purchases, it's super spammy, right? Like, that's the one thing that's kind of really interesting about this. If you look at Apple's philosophy on overall device user experience, and then you contrast that with the user experience you get in any of the really, really popular consumer-facing, really casual games, they're at odds with one another, right? Because at the one hand, you have a very polished user experience. They've dealt with malware, they've dealt with viruses. There are no pop-ups on an iOS device.
Yeah.
But then you go and you play, any of the old Zynga games or anything like of that genre, and it's a very spammy feeling experience.
Sure. So the games that I mainly play, they cost $5.
Yeah.
No in-game ads, but they also offer a free version with limited capabilities.
Yes.
Now, that is maybe it's maybe we're showing our age here. That's the sort of games we like, where you just buy the game.
Yes.
And play. Is it because the teenagers nowadays are used to having the in-app?
Well, no. I mean, I think it is very much what you get when you buy It's the exact same experience when you buy a low-cost PC and you open up a web browser and you just start surfing the web, right?
Yeah.
It's just not a great user experience. And if you look at the kind of free casual gaming experience on a lot of these mobile devices, it's not a great user experience. And it is what it is because it's free. No one's going to complain about it, and there's no better alternative. So again, there's another part of the metal may just be one component of a lot that needs fixing. The other big news that came out of WWDC was a feature that Apple calls continuity. Have you heard about continuity?
No.
Okay, so continuity is super interesting, right? So the idea, and this is something that Palm tried to do with WebOS way back when. The idea is that you've got an iCloud account that's tied to all your devices, and you'll be working on a document on your Mac, and you'll get like a little notification icon in the lower left-hand corner of your iPad or your iPhone, and you can literally just swipe up and continue working on the same document on all those devices. So you can be typing, an email or editing a numbers spreadsheet or editing something in Pages on an iPad, pick up without having to send it or copy it or email it to yourself, pick up and work on it on your Mac, and then go and start working on it on your iPhone as well. It's not something that we've gone hands-on with, but in the demos it looked super, super smooth.
So my question to you is, I already do that, but with a cloud service.
Yes.
With Dropbox.
Yes.
Right. That's how I can work on my PC and then just pick up my laptop and go.
Yes. And in kind of historical Apple fashion, it's nothing new, right? This is stuff that you can leverage third-party options and third-party utilities to enable. The beauty is always in the kind of default integration and the seamlessness of it.
Right.
And it remains to be seen how well it works, right? How quickly all of this stuff transitions between one and another. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff, and especially the next feature that I'll talk about here, right? One of the things that they demonstrated was, today on iOS and OS X, you can have kind of iMessage support across all your devices, right? So if you've got two iPhone users and you send me an iMessage, that'll appear on my iPad, on my Mac, on my Mac Pro, whatever. Like, it'll appear on all the devices. But if you send me an SMS or you make a phone call, those just go to the phone itself.
Right.
So with Yosemite plus iOS 8, now SMS goes phone, tablet, computer. Right. Same thing with phone calls, right? So you can choose to answer a phone call on your laptop or on your tablet or on your phone. And it's again part of this kind of integration across devices that honestly we saw. Like, that was one of the things that excited me so much about WebOS when it made that transition to tablets. That you had this kind of, hey, you can have a phone conversation on your phone as well as on your tablet. and it is stuff that you can do today with AirDroid and Android.
Yeah.
But again, it's that default out-of-box experience that kind of...
So my question to this is, say you get a message and it then gets on your devices, then you get a call and it's on all your devices.
Yeah. How annoying is that?
Well, no. So apart from having 4 speakers around your house going off when you got a phone call, when you get that notification, do you then have to remove the notification from all your devices, or if you move the notification from one, does it remove them from them all?
So again, this isn't something that we've gone hands-on with, but my assumption is, given how everything else works, if you if you answer the phone call on one device, the notification will probably dismiss everywhere else, right?
Okay, so say you miss a call.
Yeah,
that's going to be on all your devices.
Entirely possible, right? But it's all. So, this question came up in a meeting we had earlier about this kind of balance between public and private cloud. Here we have Apple kind of leveraging the iCloud infrastructure, and it's there and used opportunistically. So in this case, all your devices are signed into your iCloud account. It can just as easily say, hey, I can dismiss this notification on all of your devices with this iCloud account.
Do you have a storage limit on? You
do. So that was that's the other big feature, right? One of the the things they announced is when iPhoto and photos in the cloud kind of first became a part of the iOS infrastructure. One of the big limitations was it would only automatically store your last 1,000 photos.
Right.
Apple has since lifted that to, hey, it'll store all your photos, and it'll even give you kind of access to things that you don't have cached on your device, and kind of opportunistically leverage the cloud to get access to it. But the big question is, how much bandwidth, how much storage do you get?
Yeah.
And the free is still 5 gigs, right? And then you've got to pay something like 99 cents a month for 20 gigs. I think that's what it is.
Okay.
And then they're higher tiers. So we're not yet at the point where Apple or anyone is really willing to subsidize infinite storage, right?
Except Google.
And I feel like we're close, but I can see the use cases where it's a concern, right?
Okay.
Especially with like recording 4K video, right?
Yeah.
Like if I just record 4K video,
you eat 5 gigs in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So with that, with the other cloud services, if you sign up friends, you get extra space.
Yes.
Are you still stuck with you can't sign up other friends on this 5 gig?
Correct. Yeah. So and part of this is a business model difference, right? Like the reason the Dropbox does it is because they want everyone to use Dropbox.
Yeah. Apple already has everybody using it.
Well, Apple. I mean, this is just kind of an additional service for its hardware purchasers, right? But at a high level, those are the kind of the main takeaways from WWDC. It definitely, to me, it felt like a very, very solid keynote. A clear focus on the developers. And it's interesting, this is one of the things that I brought up earlier today. If we look at it had a very Microsoft 1990s sort of feel to it, and not necessarily in a bad way, right? If you look at the evolution of the Windows PC ecosystem, it was really this promise that, hey, we'll own all the software and we'll enable this kind of entire ecosystem of hardware vendors to become rich and successful and partake in what we do. But the software is what we control. With Apple, it's almost the opposite, right? Where they say, look, we'll control the hardware. You're not going to make any money on the hardware. But we will enable and do the best possible to kind of let all you guys out there as developers make money.
But as long as you develop on our platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right? Which makes sense. I mean, the same thing. You could say the same thing about Windows PCs, right? You can, as long as you build stuff that will run Windows, right? You're allowed to do it. It's just interesting to me how similar those two things feel. And the real challenge then is, if the two are indeed comparable, just kind of different sides of the same coin, does that mean Apple is susceptible to the same pitfalls, right?
Correct.
And at what point, and how do they deal with those challenges, right? Because obviously if you look at Microsoft today, this is a very different Microsoft than we had 10, 15 years ago.
Do you see Apple following what Microsoft used to do, but in an accelerated time frame?
So in the mobile, if let's exclude Apple and let's look at in the mobile space in general, right? That's what we've seen. We've seen the same ups, the same downs, just in an accelerated time frame. There are differences here, though. If we're talking about Apple in particular, it's a far less political organization, right? I mean, if you look at how this thing was run, it was all common goal, just do the right thing. You don't have iOS people kind of fighting with Mac people. Like, at least from the outside, that's what it looks like, right? You don't see these silos that each want to only look at for themselves versus you have this kind of very, very big cohesive organization, very flat structure. So I don't necessarily know that, we'll see the same end result, but I suspect we'll see a lot of the same challenges. And it'll be really interesting to see how those challenges are kind of met and dealt with. Shifting back to Computex for a bit, one of the announcements that you covered at the Intel press event was the launch or the announcement of Intel's Core M.
Yes.
Right. So this is the first Broadwell
14
nanometer Broadwell. We get new branding with it, and we get a commitment on ship date. Right. So they didn't talk about i3, i5, i7. I'm assuming that stuff is coming, but holiday this year, not Cortex, Core M. What did they show? What did they talk about?
So the day before, ASUS did their corporate press conference, and they showed off the Transformer Book T300 Qi.
Okay.
But they were very coy on the processor.
Yeah.
So out comes the Intel keynote, and Mr. Shi from ASUS was gladly showing his device.
Yeah.
So I believe that will be the first device coming with Core M.
Okay. And so Core M, it can be used in fanless designs.
Sure. So sub 10 watt
okay.
fanless designs, tablets.
And they, some of the Intel tablet reference designs that they did there were just insanely thin, right? So they had one that was 7.2 millimeters.
Yeah.
This is full core. And then you had one that was 6 point something. Like we're now in like bone thickness territory.
Yeah.
But with full blown like core goodness in it.
Yeah.
So that to me is like super exciting, right? Because
then it comes down to industrial design. Because you can't, if you're going to do a device that thin, you can't do it cheaply, otherwise it's going to bend.
So it's industrial design, but the other thing is it boils down to OS, right? Like so Kirk actually in the press event, Kirk Skaugen in the press event that we just saw, he held up one of these Core M devices, looked super thin. I think he said 10% thinner than the iPad Air. But running Android, I think that's key. This stuff has to run Android because
right.
Windows 8, even 8.1 Update 1, it's good, but the tablet experience isn't quite there yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's something that's kind of really, really interesting to me. I can see Apple using Core M for the 12-inch rumored Retina MacBook Air.
Right.
But I kind of almost want to see them do like an iPad Pro kind of deal with this in there.
Yeah.
That obviously requires porting iOS to x86 and all this other stuff. But overall, a bunch of really cool stuff has been happening. Like I said, we've got G3 coming in terms of results, review, all of that goodness. We've got more Computex coverage coming, and we'll be at Google I/O as well in a few weeks here. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank Intel for loaning us your studio resources as well as the stage. And thank you guys for watching, and thank you guys for following our Computex coverage.